Hi, I'm Jay, and this is the closest thing I could find to a proper swamp.
Shrek. You know him well. He hangs out with a talking horse who hungers for waffles. He stole a woman from a tower and married her because she is green like he is. He has several children. At some point, Justin Timberlake is in it. But in the subject of today's video, which put DreamWorks on the map more than ants ever could, the gang has taken a break from whatever usually happens in the Shrek movies to instead do nothing of consequence. Shrek Smash and Crash Racing is another Garfield kart, so much so that when I made the poll deciding what game should be next for the LLV, I considered not even putting the thing on the list. So today we're talking about something of a special category. See, it's one thing to be a game adaptation from a show or movie or even a book, but quite another to be a spin-off game from the games adapted from that other media. You have your 5 degrees of Kevin Bacon. This is 5 degrees away from Kevin Bacon. Enough degrees that when Kevin Bacon looks you in the eyes, he no longer recognizes his own son. It is one thing to create a clone, but what when you create a clone of a clone? What does this do to a soul? The ambiguation of an entire breadth of work, enough so that it can be neatly copy and pasted into another new package, one with 3 pigs who ride on a flying carpet.
All of this I ask today in order to network us along a series of roads, the terminus of which, I hope, will lead us to the answer of one of life's most complex questions. Who is Shrek? Welcome to the longest licensed voyage. Alright, I guess I have to say this once like I really mean it. Hey friends, let's talk about Shrek Smash and Crash Racing, a game where a donkey gets a magic wand and uses it to give everyone race cars. By which I mean he creates an auto body shop of terrors. Frankly, I am undecided on whether this is terrible, genius, or wandering aimless somewhere through the drought-riddled valley in between. What the folks over at, Torus Games did here was choose not just to adapt any Shrek-based themes and visual motifs into cars. Instead, they took anything that moves and made it a goddamn cart. A lot of them just ride animals. Shrek has this terrible swamp boar, Puss in Boots that supports some endangered wildlife, and Donkey is riding his wife.
Okay, you're mad at it. But look on the bright side. It's gonna be much easier now.
Much like previous LLV subject Garfield Kart, which, yes, does still haunt me to this day, this Shrek racing experience does a lot of copying from the good games. But unlike the Lasagna Cat game, this one doesn't do as sort of okay a job at copying off the basic primer of kart physics that made Garfield Kart an at least sort of acceptable gateway to madness. No, in Shrek Munchin' Dunkin' Cap'n Crunchin', the developers over at Torus Games were faced, as we have all been faced at some point in our lives, with one simple question. Is a cart a car? It seems the answer in most of these games is an approximate yes. Has wheels, does momentum, knows how to go vroom vroom. In this thing, though, the answer appears to actually be no. A cart is not a car. A cart is a rubber ball. Rolling, bouncing, rebounding, and going the wrong way, you name it. So now let's talk about the ambiguity at work here, the reflection of a reflection at work. Once the vile poll I now regret putting online gave me this game to work with, I immediately got curious about whether the people behind Shrek Slurp and Burp Overeaten had worked on any previous Shrek games, of which there are a truly unforgivable quantity. Spin-offs are weird. We see them all over the place, between original game properties and licensed ones. Sometimes we get one where enough heart and actual work is put in that they become their own full franchises. Mario Kart is one of those. We also get ones that are just thrown out there for an extra buck, like the Zelda ones with crossbow training and Picross, pinball spin-offs, puzzle game spin-offs, and yes, racing game spin-offs. They're all part of this cycle of side games, often handled by different teams from the main ones, where the recognizable aspects of the main series get lifted and dropped into a new place, one that, at its core, usually has very little or nothing at all to do with the original thing. Now Mario Kart, again, is an exception, in part because it went past just having, recognizable characters, and also had items players knew, stuff like the mushroom, the power star, as well as visual and even music cues that feel like a more intentional elaboration on things from the main games, as opposed to just a cut and paste. It would be one thing to just have the same music tracks from the main game, but instead they have their own new music that all subscribes to the same aesthetic of the original stuff. Okay, now that I've rambled about that, let's get back on track! The Shrek games have been made by a variety of different developers, and put out by a couple different publishers as well. All 4 Shrek films have received game adaptations, from the first one in 2001 to the 4th and final chapter of our truest American epic in 2010. The very first game, which intended to scare prospective players away from shelves by making the box art look like this, was published by TDK, a Japanese company you might recognize from your dad's old cassette tape collection. No, really, I didn't even know they dabbled in video games until now. I guess even in 2001, they knew that rack of blank DVDs money wouldn't last them forever. From there, almost all of the games are published by Activision, including Shrek, Shart, and Fart Flagellating. As for the developers though, you'll see names as big as Skylanders' own Vicarious Visions, who did a few handheld ports, Mass Media Inc., The Code Monkeys, and a million other small names you've probably never heard of before all show up as developer credits. The fine citizens of the Shrek cinematic universe have seen their warped visages reflected back at them, staring but unseeing by the hands of many.
But Jay, you may wonder, why are we talking about this and not the funny Shrek game? Why aren't we talking about the funny Shrek racing antics? They look bad. How come they couldn't get Mike Myers and Eddie Murphy to be in it, and Cameron Diaz? To that I say, it is now time for us, a chilly wind. It is time now for us to return to the question that I posed at the start of this video. Indeed, the question that this game and all very little that I had to say about it brought me down. Who is Shrek? Okay, no conspiracies, I promise. But who is Shrek?
Shrek Dungeons & Dragons playing has some weird stuff going on in it, sure, but I always find myself distracted by how slightly off characters in games like these often look. This isn't gonna be all about visuals, but I think it starts that way. It's funny because this is nothing like the Naked Brothers Band game, where some poor souls had to render a group of children in Wii graphics. Here, everything we're dealing with comes from a series of movies that are already animated. So why is it so distracting that these characters look like they're out of one of those third world ripoff studios? I digress. Looking at Shrek and Fiona and their storybook harem of bad neighbors makes me think about the power of a mascot. So, we see Shrek here, riding his terrible weed horse that definitely should have gone through more revisions. And immediately, we know why this game exists, why the kids who begged their beleaguered moms to buy it at the grocery store checkout were so loudly heard. It's because the green ogre man is in it. The one with the nostril ears? They know that man. They love him and his many humorous farts. And so when they see his face that has never known soap, they know they shall enjoy the package within. You see this happen with Mario all the time. Back in the day, when that first Mario Kart came out, I'm sure that was probably what motivated a lot of kids to buy it, who might not have cared if it were some other group of characters driving around. I've always thought of Mario Party and the sports games and the like as Nintendo teams taking a well-funded chance to play around with something different while not worrying about it selling, because hey, Mario's in it. Look at him go, playing tennis, teaching kids to type, practicing medicine. And see, that works with Mario because everyone in that universe is a blank slate character, essentially, to be dropped into whatever scenario they're needed for. It's basically official lore that the Mario characters are a theater troupe of sorts, which is why Yoshi is relegated to being Mario's steed in one game, but then has his own driver's license in another. Shrek doesn't have room for time and thought to be put in. They made games based on the movies. Those sold well enough that Daddy Activision wants to squeeze more juice from this strained, dying fruit. So let's put them in cars, make them do trivia, whatever. It doesn't matter. The Ogre Man is there. Kids love the Ogre Man. But where, then, does that leave Shrek himself? You take the Shrek of the titular films, and you run him through the gamer mill until he comes out the other end, distorted into a version of himself made by Digital Illusion CE, or No Wonder, or XPEC Entertainment. Does this Shrek have the same desires as the one from the films? Does he like the same things? Does he feel the same about Fiona? And indeed, is Fiona the same? And then, we call upon folks to make a spin-off. What do they know? Who is Shrek to them? Is their Shrek a chewed and regurgitated version of those ones from the first two movies which were out at the time? Had they played the corresponding games? Did the folks over at Torus Games know anyone who worked on the main Shrek games? Can we even know for sure that they saw the Shrek series of films? Or was their Shrek born coldly from a list of bullet points on a sheet handed their way by corporate, grown in a lab with no game designer warm-hearted enough to suckle it and calm its infant cries? Truly, whose Shrek is this?
Aha! Ha! Your name is Mud!
The answer, I suppose, is that this polygonal green giant and his milfoil hippo belong only to the kids who had this game and this game alone to play. One particularly unmemorable birthday or Christmas. This revision of a character only recognizable by his name and appearance and approximation of an accent.
I've got toenails that are tougher than you.
Was there for someone, I'm sure of it. Find me the person of whomst I speak, the child with fond memories of bouncing off the walls and running into these dopey little knights. Bring that person to me and we shall hold them a parade, for they truly have taken in a clone of a clone, a being with no original identity of their own. They made an outcast no more. But what do we do with any of this information? Frankly, I'm not entirely sure.
I may be
I guess what it is we're talking about here is Shrek facing what it truly means to be a mascot. Mario has done it, Mickey Mouse has done it, Tony Stark did it, and look how that went for him in the end. That last one isn't in any way a good example of what I'm saying, but listen. What I mean is that any character who becomes iconic, it seems, faces the eventual dissolution of what originally made them who they were. This is commonly referred to as Flandersization, named after Ned Flanders from The Simpsons, who started out as a simple cartoon stereotype of a devout, well-combed Christian wrapped around normal family man humanity. By now, he's far more wild of a stereotype because that's what makes him one of the funny yellow men that people tune in to laugh at. The family charm gets old, but the wacky religious man is still funny when doing appropriately wacky things. Mickey Mouse isn't doing Steamboat Willie antics anymore, but people still see the smiling rat with his particular head shape, and they feel happy. Enough so that he has his own theme park. People see Mario, and whether he's jumping on Goombas, driving through space, or going on an adventure on a dead console, folks will play it because they recognize the mustached man with the red hat. They love that man. So what's the takeaway here? Is it a grim lesson in how all of our beloved icons, given enough popularity and publicity, will eventually perish in the face of capitalism? Sure, fuck, I guess it actually is that, now that I think about it. I guess the other thing I was gonna say carries less weight now, but I'll say it anyway. The takeaway, I think, is that at the end of the day, it's okay to pick and choose what iterations of a character are real to you. I'm not talking about canon or former canon. I'm talking about what iterations of an iconic character define that character for you. Who is Shrek? For me, he's the main character of those first two movies. Who is my Mario? Probably the one solving puzzles on tiny planets in the Galaxy games. Yes, I was late to the game on 3D Mario, don't friggin' at me about it. The catch with just about any iconic character in popular culture and media is that none of them has an identity limited to just one thing, one place or time. We mentioned Flandersization earlier. Who are the Simpsons for you? What era of the show defines them? Many Simpsons scholars will put the bookends somewhere around seasons 3 through 8, but there are people who fondly watch it now, 30 seasons deep, who might think of any point along that timeline as what defines that show for them. So Shrek left and right voting is basically the Simpsons season 27 of Shrek things. For someone, it's probably iconic. For most of us, it's a late, meaningless iteration of a thing we know, but for someone, maybe it's the iteration. Who knows? At the end of the day, that, at least, is nice. So, at the end of the day, what I really want you to take away from this is that Shrek Smash and Crash Racing was so boring that I had nothing to say about it. So I wrote this whole other video instead about a different thing I thought was interesting and tied it in, because this is my channel. I've been Jay. I cannot be bought. This is my swamp. Oh, fuck, shit.
Ready on my ninth life.